I'm visiting with Dr. Kevin Johnson, who is a professor and head of the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Vanderbilt University. He also has a joint appointment as a pediatrician with their university hospitals. Thanks for visiting today.
Happy to do it.
Can you tell me a little bit about your story, how you got started in health informatics and how it's working for you now?
Well, if I go back to, I guess, the best place to go back in terms of my story, I got interested in health informatics while I was a medical student. While I was an undergraduate. I went to undergrad to Dickinson College thinking that I was going to be a veterinarian, and had really no interest in taking any additional math other than the calculus and linear algebra classes I had signed up for as a freshman. Took those classes, and then we essentially had a book burning party at the end of the year, meaning almost everybody in the class. And did that, didn't think about it again. Meanwhile, in sophomore year, I started taking regular chemistry, and in the chemistry class, as we were doing our stoichiometry, we had to spend time in the computer lab to use the computer to answer many of the questions. And in fact, at the end of my calculus class, the professor had said, by the way, we're starting a new computer science major. If any of you are interested in continuing your math pursuits, you might want to think about CS. Of course, we all laughed, went back to everything else we were doing. So fast forward to while I was a sophomore, I started to appreciate the computer lab because there was a guy named Peter who had come from the Netherlands and was taking early computer science courses, but also working on writing a game. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen anybody using a computer to write a game, and was never terribly interested in playing games. To make a long story short, I got very interested in writing a game, started writing my own game called Hunter, and Peter and I both kind of had these competing and very successful games on campus that were eventually both picked up by Digital Equipment Corporation and sent to other places. So it was really a fun time. Well, along the way, I discovered that computers could do a lot of very interesting things with information. Ended up getting a minor in computer science from Dickinson, and did an independent study as I was switching from veterinary medicine into medicine on the use of computers in healthcare. So that was really how it all started. I got to Hopkins for medical school, began working very closely with a gentleman named Dick Johannes, did some early work with computer-based documentation, actually won an award in AMC, and then all through medical school continued to do research with computer-based documentation and basically very early medical informatics work. And by the time I got to residency, had already decided I was going to get an advanced degree in informatics, and that's how it started.
And what's your specialty area? I think I read about pointing devices, perhaps interfaces. What would you consider as your subdiscipline in informatics now?
So my generation of doctors who got into informatics typically came at it because of some sort of condition in the healthcare system that we wanted to improve. So for me, it was all about documentation from the very beginning and ways that we can use different technologies to get doctors to use computers as a byproduct, as a product of their work to generate information. Recognizing the multiple ways the information would actually be used, but that the starting point was getting accurate and complete information from the healthcare system. If you read about what I've done, you won't necessarily get that elevator speech, but what I've actually been doing is that quest. So I used a lot of very early technologies. I was one of the early people looking at PDAs with a goal of having them be a data entry tool. I did a lot of work with computer-based documentation, and one of the sort of first studies in this country doing an interaction analysis to see how the introduction of a computer into the patient-provider dyad in the room changed the actual discourse and changed the study, changed the visit.
Awesome.
So I did a lot of work then. And then I went to Vanderbilt and had just started working on the idea of e-prescribing when I was at Hopkins. At Vanderbilt, I actually wrote the e-prescribing system based on what we had learned at Hopkins, and then did a number of studies looking in the medication safety space. And then from there, recognizing some of the things we were able to do with a project called Showing Your Work, realized that there had to be a patient-facing part to this, and began working on this project called, two projects, but one called Project Health Design, which was an initiative funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And that project was all about developing, it turns out, the first text message-based behavior change system for medication management. And then we gave that source code out. There have now been about 30 or 40 applications that have been built that are available at an app near you, based on the early work we did in Project Health Design. And then the other thing I was working on was the use of web services to improve the clinical decision support being used by those same doctors. So it's really all been about how do we get the information efficiently from doctors to improve care.
And I believe that e-prescribing is now used by most all providers.
Yes, thanks to meaningful use.
Significant reduction in harm.
That's correct.
As you mentioned safety.
That's right.
Which is another of your areas.
That's right.
Go ahead with that.
You're absolutely right. I think meaningful use helped to catapult a lot of the early work that we did in safety, many people, into the limelight. And the fact that we were able to demonstrate through evaluation studies many of those impacts. And one of the things I've done very closely is work with industry through my entire career. So I never really departed as a scientist into the lab. I always started working very early in a partnership format. So I've been working with SureScripts before they were actually as big as they are now, with the goal being that we would use the technologies we're using now, plus the kinds of data that SureScripts had available, to really incentivize the development of e-prescribing as a technology that was going to be used by all doctors. So that was one of my first, I think, and exciting wins, in that we've been able to use the company like SureScripts, research data that I'm generating and others in our team are generating, and work that we're doing testing all the standards that SureScript is developing based on those data to move e-prescribing forward.
Very cool.
Thank you.
You have many students in health informatics, and I'm sure they come from many different disciplines.
That's right.
You've described your own story as a physician getting into safety, e-prescribing, and many applications in computing science. Can you sort of describe why health informatics is important and what students should do as they enter this field?
Yeah, I think health informatics is probably the most important field right now in medicine. And that's been something that's been borne out over the last really about 2 decades, beginning with a lot of the research that's coming out about what's wrong with healthcare in terms of patient safety, quality, consistency, efficiency, and where we'd like to go in the new era of data to information to knowledge, focusing on the data, and watching every other industry, every retail industry, banking, every app that's on our phones have interoperable data that's really transforming the way we live our lives. Healthcare is clearly behind in that. So we're now recognizing that thanks to the work of Meaningful Use, thanks to some of what's happening right now with the sort of ubiquitous nature of phone technology that provides notifications and alerts in real time. Everybody's asking the same question, which is why isn't healthcare doing that? So we need the next generation who are really thinking about how their phones and how the devices in their lives are impacting life to apply what they're seeing or thinking about to healthcare. Many of the biggest concerns we had, so for example, all healthcare data are unstructured, or healthcare data contain an enormous amount of uncertainty, is no different than the data in a lot of other places in our lives where we're now getting very effective technologies that allow us to receive information, decide whether it's valid or not, and make a decision or not based on this information. So that next generation of kids, and that starts as early as, say, 2nd grade. And one of our real interests is how do we start making health informatics or biomedical informatics the subject of a science fair experiment? And we're doing that. We're starting to work now on textbooks. We have the High School Scholars Program here at AMIA, which has just been a huge opportunity for students in all walks of life, including underserved students who've never been out of their own region. One of our first high school scholars here at AMIA was a student from the Nashville area who'd never been on a plane, let alone ever visiting Washington, D.C. So we made it a point of that in that program of having her do a presentation and then go see the actual monuments and see the White House. And because of that, she has now gone to college and done some things that her family never imagined she was going to do. So that kind of early introduction to the field, I think, is just critical to getting the right kinds of kids from all walks of life who come with very different mindsets about what's wrong with healthcare to get involved with this field.
Awesome. You have students at many levels, and AMIA has reached out to high school students, STEM students, and you describe it very well. Describe some of your students' work perhaps at the annual meeting today at AMIA. How many are here and what are they doing?
Well, as it turns out, if you look at the students who've been involved with any of the summer programs, ranging from early high school to late high school to college to medical school students. I think there's a number of our programs right now that are all represented at this meeting. As it turns out, the Vanderbilt students this particular year only have a poster. But we have had many summer students. This summer we had 16 students doing a variety of projects, ranging from very early precision medicine projects, looking at some of the data that we had around, for example, pharmacovigilance, and determining whether there were new ways we could be thinking about talking with providers and nurses to help them with education around precision medicine, to projects that were sort of much more pragmatic, the use of different algorithms that are known in the machine learning space to evaluate, specific data sets and categorize those data, sort of classic data analytics type work, all the way to a number of students who are in the socio-technical space, looking at things like satisfaction and workflow as Vanderbilt goes forward with an Epic install. So we try to get the students involved in everything that we're doing, from precision medicine all the way through consumer health informatics, research informatics, and they love, again, different students come with different interests. Everybody who goes into healthcare often has some life situation that has made healthcare interesting, with either a sick relative or a position they find themselves in, or their own personal illnesses, or their exposure to healthcare systems because doctors are in their family or nurses are in their family. And we let the students kind of explore where their interest takes them.
Cool. Your team has built a successful program at Vanderbilt. If you were speaking to deans of colleges that might be starting programs or growing programs in health informatics, can you talk some about how the field is growing and your view of education for health informatics?
Sure, I can talk a bit about the way the field is growing and the view. I think that when you look at the CTSA program, so most of the deans in this country are very familiar with that program, the Clinical Translational Sciences program. Every early call for a program asked for that program to have some knowledge around the uses of data, and specifically the use of information technology and informatics to improve translation. And I think that motivated many of the early programs, many of the larger programs, into getting on board the informatics train. We're now at a point where everybody is starting to catch on, and frankly, if you are not moving forward in this area, you are officially moving behind. And so for our deans, the deans that I think have been very involved with the CTSA program, and for those deans of programs that are either working with CTSA programs or working with the PCORI initiative or working in any one of a number of the larger medical initiatives right now, there's almost no reason to discuss health informatics because they all recognize that biomedical informatics trained people are essential to their mission. But there are still a number of programs where the research maybe hasn't hit as hard into this particular area. And to those programs and those deans, I would actually say you really need to be thinking hard about how you're going to be prepared to take the data that's being generated from research and translate it into any one of a number of things, either larger data, larger grants, team science, precision medicine, or practice. So therefore, I think the deans need to be thinking about this, recognizing that if you're late to the party, you're going to have a major supply and demand problem. Every other program is going to be trying to recruit everybody. And if you look at the double AMC median salaries right now for biomedical informatics trained people, they're going up and up and up and up simply because the demand is really outstripping the supply, which means these deans also need to be educating. They need to figure out a way to have a training program either through the National Library of Medicine or potentially through one of the other NIH institutes or through foundation money, so that they can then have a group of people who are locally familiar with their environment, who are trained in biomedical informatics, and then who can hopefully stay on as junior faculty to catapult them into, I think, this important wave of healthcare.
Excellent.
Thank you.